What is up, everybody? And today we're going back at you, History Helpers, with another presentation on the American Revolutionary War. So this presentation will be covering the American Revolutionary War. Without further ado, let's begin. I know it's been a little bit since I've posted maybe a week or so. So I figured I was long overdue for some more videos. So American Revolutionary War, let's get into it. The American Revolution was from 1775 to 1783. The Revolutionary War is also known as the American Revolution. The war was fought between the British and the colonists. The result of the American Revolution was a new nation called the United States of America. So now we're going to take a look at the events that are leading to the revolution. And here's our essential question. Which British policies in the colonies led to disagreements? Navigation Acts of 1756. King George III used an old law to make the colonists pay taxes on goods shipped in English ships. The colonists responded by smuggling goods. French and Indian War. So let's talk a little bit about French and Indian War. So the French and Indian War was the name for a war that was fought between England and the French. And it's called the French and Indian War, but it was really mainly England and France fighting with a little bit of help from the Indians on the French side. But the British won the French and Indian War, but it had a large debt because of it, so they had decided to tax the colonies for defending them in the war. Writs of assistance. The king angered the colonists again by enacting the writs of assistance, which is another old law. This allowed the use of general search warrants, which let them to search anyone, anytime, anywhere. The colonists were very angry and protested. Proclamation of 1763. The Proclamation of 1763 was an act in which the king said, "No settling west of the Appalachian Mountains." The colonists disobeyed his orders. By 1763, the colonists had enjoyed a great amount of freedom. They resented the new orders issued by the king and of being taxed without their consent. The Sugar Act of 1764. The Sugar Act actually lowered taxes from the Molasses Act, but was more strictly enforced than the Molasses Act. The Stamp Act of 1765 placed taxes on any articles written on paper. This included newspapers, wills, licenses, deeds, and pamphlets. So here's a nice little diagram here that will show us the steps of the revolution. So we got the Proclamation of 1763. Yeah, and the mountains, the Appalachian Mountains, remember that. The colonists were angry because of money purposes. The Sugar Act. So yeah, they started smuggling stuff. Again, it had to do with money. The Stamp Act. And Sons of Liberty still had to do with money. You can see all these have to do with money. Hold on one second, guys. All right, here. Here we go. So the Stamp Act of 1765. Colonists responded by creating the Stamp Act in Congress and the colonists responded by creating the Stamp Act. Congress and refused to buy stamps or stamped paper. They also burned pictures of the king in effigy. The Quartering Act of 1765 said the colonists must provide salaries, housing, and supplies for British soldiers. The colonists did not agree and did not obey. The Townshend Acts of 1767, another act, the Townshend Acts of 1767, placed taxes on glass, lead, paint, and tea, and was used to pay salaries of colonial officers, including governors and judges. In response, the colonists boycotted all British goods. So let's look again at our little diagram here. So we talked about the proclamation and how the colonists got angry and how a lot of this stuff had to do with money. We talked about the Sugar Act and how they started smuggling, started to deal with money. We talked about the Stamp Act and the Quartering Act of 1765. The Stamp Act, the Congress Act, Sons of Liberty. tried to deal with money. The Townshend Acts, Townshend Acts of 1767. They had to deal with all this stuff up there. Lead, paint. Yeah. More boycotts of the Daughters of Liberty. Still had to deal with money. And now we're going to look at the last three. Daughters of Liberty organized themselves to teach each other how to make their own cloth, do things to keep from buying British goods. So yeah, if you missed this one, again, it was the Daughters of Liberty organized themselves to and to teach each other how to make their own cloth and do other things to help them buy British goods. Violence. Violence erupts as British troops are sent to Boston, 1768. This leads to the Boston Massacre. The Boston Massacre occurred on March 5th, 1770. Happened as tensions between colonists and redcoats peaked. Townspeople were pushed to the customs house, and the British Guard called for help as colonists were crowding. The crowd of colonists began to throw stones, wood, etc. at the soldiers, and several soldiers were knocked down. They fired several shots at the crowd. Several colonists were killed. The riot was used as propaganda by the colonists. Seems to be a problem with that slide, so we'll just skip it. So the fallout from the Boston Massacre. The Crispus attacks. Crispus Attucks was the first colonist killed. He was of African American descent. The British soldiers were put on trial in Boston and were defended by John Adams. Adams argued the shootings occurred as a result of self-defense and that they were to be found innocent. So I'm going to skip through most of this because we talked about all this earlier in the video. These are steps to revolution again. We just talked about town. We talked about something earlier. Talked about Daughters of Liberty, Boston Massacre. The Committee of Correspondence will be coming up. And still they'll have to deal with money. So here's a fun little video on the Boston Massacre. I'm going to make sure to put the link in the description of this video. Yes. Okay. So on July 9th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was read for the first time in New York, in front of George Washington and his troops. In reaction to what had been read, the soldiers and the citizens went to the Bowling Green, a park in Manhattan, where a statue of King George III on horseback stood. A mob of people pulled down the statue, and later the lead was melted to make musket balls or bullets for use in war for independence. How people on the right reacting? About 1/5 of the colonists were loyalists, who felt that British laws must be obeyed. About 2/5 of the colonists were moderates, who in general wanted Britain and American colonies to resolve their differences peacefully. Moderates are not clearly depicted in the painting, but could have been present at the scene. What percent left does that leave the Patriots? Can you spot the Patriots in this picture? So yeah, the Patriots are going to be everybody pulling down the horse will be a Patriot. Yes. And everybody who's sort of reacting to it will be a Patriot. So we're going to skip this. And we're going to go right over to Committee of Correspondence, founded in 1772 by Samuel Adams, James Warren, Mercy Otis Warren. They wrote pamphlets and letters that were sent throughout the colonies to stir hatred of the British. Mercy Otis Warren also drafted the first American history of the Revolutionary War. The Tea Act of 1773 was passed by Parliament so that the British East India Tea Company could sell their tea cheaper than the price of the smuggled tea. This was ignited the Boston Tea Party. Boston Tea Party. On December 16th, 1773, Sam Adams led a group of patriots disguised as Indians on a raid of British ships docked in Boston's harbor. They dumped cargoes of tea overboard. Intolerable Acts of 1774 punished Boston for the Tea Party, and it closed the harbor until it was cleaned up. Self-government was denied in Massachusetts, and the Quartering Act was enforced. The colonists were appalled. They set up the first Continental Congress to decide their plan of action. The first Continental Congress in Philadelphia is where it met. 55 men met and represented the colonies. It was a political body to represent American interests. And I'll put this link to the Continental Congress video. That's really good in the description as well. And representatives at the first Continental Congress in Massachusetts, Sam Adams. Massachusetts was Sam Adams and John Adams. New York was John Jay. Virginia was Patrick Henry and George Washington. There's just some big names. The distinctions between Virginians, Pennsylvanians, New Yorkers, and New Englanders are no more. I am not a Virginian, but I am American. Patrick Henry. Decisions of Congress. The Congress wrote a statement of grievances which repealed the 13 Acts of Parliament because they violated the colonists' rights. They boycotted all British goods and trade and vowed to arm themselves against British if necessary. Britain's soldiers. Britain's soldiers were trained and wore uniforms with bright red jackets that earned them the nickname of Redcoats. The colonial militia was a citizens' army that consisted of ordinary citizens, farmers, craftspeople, and businessmen. They were prepared to drop everything at a moment's notice and thus were nicknamed the Minutemen. Colonist viewpoints. Patriots wanted to fight for independence from the king. Loyalists loyal to the king and their mother country. The Sons of Liberty were a patriot group that was led by Sam Adams and John Hancock. They were involved in the Boston Tea Party. They constructed Liberty poles where they displayed pictures of British tax collectors and even had one tax collector tarred and feathered. There we go. One picture about that. Battles of Lexington and Concord occurred in 1775. British troops planned to destroy military supplies in Concord and to capture Sam Adams and John Hancock. And now I put this video about the Battle of Lexington and Concord in the description as well. 3 men served as messengers to warn the colonists of upcoming attacks. They were Paul Revere, William Dawes, and Sam Prescott. They rode through the town and announced, "The British are coming." In the Battle of Lexington, the British soldiers marched all night from Boston. They were met by Minutemen at the Old North Bridge. The Battle of Lexington, Americans were told, "Do not fire unless fired upon. But if they mean to have a war, let it begin here." Who fired the first shot of the Revolution? No one knows for sure, but it is believed that the British fired the first shots. When the fighting was over, 8 Minutemen were dead. So yeah, the first shot of the Revolutionary War was called the shot heard around the world. Because there's a debate between historians about who actually fired the shot. But all we know is that a shot was fired, and that was what started the fight between the colonists and Britain and the Revolutionary War. To Concord, yeah. So the British arrived outside of Concord, where they ambushed the British arrived outside of Concord, where they were ambushed by the militia. The Americans had fired the shot heard around the world at the battles of Lexington and Concord. The British retreated to Boston. So yeah, we're gonna get to the new stuff. So I'm gonna skip really quick here. So yeah, here's some of the new stuff now. You got the Tea Act, the Boston Tea Party, the Intolerable Acts, and Continental Congress. And then the war erupts. Second Continental Congress met to decide what to do now. Initiated a last effort with King George III for peace. They extended the Olive Branch petition, which he rejected. Patrick Henry was a passionate orator from Virginia, famous for his immortal words of "Give me liberty or give me death." And we have another picture here of Continental Congress too. Continental Army. The Second Continental Congress established a Continental Army that was commanded by George Washington. This organized the militia into an official army. At the Battle of Bunker Hill in 1775, the militia waited for the redcoats at the top of Breed's Hill. Because the militia was low on ammunition, they were told, "Don't fire unless you see the whites of their eyes." The redcoats charged up the hill 3 times before colonists retreated, but it proved the militia could fight. Thomas Paine was a revolutionary writer and philosopher who wrote Common Sense. It said all Americans should support independence. He said it was crazy for an island to rule a continent. Thomas Paine gave all profits from his books to the war. Benjamin Franklin was a Pennsylvanian who was sent to France to conceive them. So Benjamin Franklin was from Pennsylvania, and he was sent to France to ask for their help in the revolution with soldiers, supplies, and ships. Abigail Adams was the wife of John Adams, felt that the Founding Fathers should remember the ladies and extend rights to women in America. And we're going to skip this. Ooh, go back one. Sorry, guys. I forgot to take these slides out. Anyways, so the Declaration of Independence was drafted by Ben Franklin, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson. The main author was Jefferson, and he actually wrote the first copy. Declaring Independence, 1776. Declaring independence in 1776 was not easy for the colonists. They discussed it for a month. On July 2nd, 1776, 12 states decided to declare independence from Britain. Only New York did not vote. The Declaration of Independence was signed on July 4, 1776. 13 states unanimously approved, and the United States of America was born. This was treason in the eyes of the king. Here's a copy of the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence, Section 1. The introduction to the Declaration of Independence explains why the colonists want to separate from Britain. It is called the Preamble. And there's a little bit of it down there at the bottom. So, the Declaration of Independence, Section 2. The second section of the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths and happiness, says that governments are formed to protect the rights of people, and that if government ignores the rights of people, then a new government can be created. The Declaration of Independence, Section 2 continued. They established that all men are created equal and that they're given certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The third section of the Declaration of Independence lists grievances the colonists have with King George, and they're upset with his actions and call him a tyrant. There were 27 grievances listed against King George III. Changed how colonies governed when he closed colonial legislators after the Boston Tea Party. He had to quarter troops in homes. No laws to help the colonies. Proclamation 1763. Taxation without representation. All of those tax acts we looked at earlier: sugar tax, stamp tax, township taxes, etc. Wouldn't allow them to trade with other countries. Only the mother country. No jury trials. And then in quotes we have, or parentheses, we have anti-arrested people after the Boston Tea Party if they broke a curfew. No protection from enemies, did nothing to stop the Indian raids in Ohio River Valley. Declared war on his own people at Lexington and Concord. Section 4 of the Declaration of Independence pointed out that King George III ignored the colonists when they reached out to him with the Olive Branch Petition. Section 5 of the Declaration of Independence, the actual section where the colonies declare independence. And then this is a video on the Declaration of Independence. It will be in the description. As I said, all the videos will be in the description. And the militia had many strengths, aka the Continental Army. They were fighting on their home territory. They wanted independence. They were excited about the war, and they had a large territory to hide in. There are many weaknesses of the militia. They were untrained soldiers. They had no money and no navy. They were low on supplies. John Adams said, "We will have a long and bloody war to go through." The USA was divided. There were loyalists, again, who did not want independence. Lots were in the South. Patriots wanted independence. There's a lot in the middle and north, and neutralists were found all over. On the front lines, important participants on the battlefields. George Washington was a colonel in the French and Indian War. He became commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. Despite his leadership, the Continental Army lost most early battles. Women played important roles in the Revolutionary War. They were nurses, cooks, spies. One of the most famous ones was, I believe it says, Mary Pitcher, whose real name was Mary Hayes Macaulay. Nathan Hale was a hero at the Battle of Long Island. He was a teacher from Connecticut who volunteered to spy on the Redcoats. He disguised himself as a Dutch school teacher and was hanged when he was captured with the British. He's quoted as saying, "I regret that I have but one life to lose for my country." Major battlegrounds. So yeah, we have the little key down here. So you can see that the American victories were the blue ones, and the British victories are the orangey red ones, more red. And as always, this video will be in the description. The war continues. Britain sends more troops to fight in the war. The Hessians are brought in to assist with the British. They were German mercenaries who were trained to fight in the American Revolution. So yeah, we're going to skip this. The Battle of Trenton occurred on December 26, 1776. Washington and his troops snuck across the Delaware River during the night of December 25th and attacked in the morning. They staged a surprise attack on the Hessian and British soldiers in Trenton, New Jersey. Washington crossed the Delaware. The Battle of Saratoga in 1777 occurred in New York. The Patriots destroyed bridges, cut trees for blocks, hidden trees, etc. The Americans defeated the larger British force and won the battle. It was the turning point of the war. Why? Because France agrees to help the Americans. So yeah, France agreed to help the Americans at this time. So we have the backing of the French army on our side. And this is kind of a big thing. I think the French definitely thought a little bit that, like, hey, if we help the Americans, maybe they'll pay us and we can sort of say we had revenge for the last time we fought Britain because they seem to be doing well. So Wentworth Cheswell. Wentworth Cheswell was a church leader and judge who fought at the Battle of Saratoga. He was known as the first African-American elected to public office in America. Valley Forge, winter of 1777 and 78. The Patriot troops traveled to Valley Forge during the winter of 1777 and 78. It was a miserable winter, very cold and snowy. The troops had little food, clothing, and supplies. By the spring, a quarter were dead. During this time, Washington read Thomas Paine's books, A Common Sense and The Crisis. Marquis de Lafayette was a French nobleman who was enthusiastic about helping the Americans defeat the British. He stayed at the Valley Forge and trained American troops. He was a friend and advisor to George Washington, and he used his own money to pay for troops. War in the South. Bernardo de Galvez and Haim Solomon. So Bernardo commanded Spanish troops in Louisiana to help protect New Orleans from British attack. And Solomon was a Polish Jew who gave loans to the American government and revolutionary leaders to pay for the war. James Armistead was a freed African-American slave who acted as a spy on the British. He worked closely with Marquis de Lafayette. John Paul Jones is known as the father of the American Navy. He raided British ports and the battle began. His ship was badly damaged, and the British commander asked him if he was ready to surrender. He famously replied, "I have not yet begun to fight." Battle at Yorktown, 1781, was a big one for the Americans. They traveled over 200 miles in 15 days. They met General Cornwallis and the British troops in Virginia. 3 sets of troops were used to close in on the Redcoats at Yorktown. The British were confused, low on supplies, and many were sick. Surrender at Yorktown. The Americans trapped Cornwallis on the peninsula. He and his troops surrounded on all 3 sides by the Continental Army. The French fleet arrives in 6 hours before the British fleet, and blocks his escape. Cornwallis surrenders, and the war is over. General Cornwallis surrenders to General Washington. Abandonment. King George III abandons the idea of controlling the colonies. The Treaty of Paris, 1783, ended the American Revolution. The American colonies hereby recognize all lands east of the Mississippi. King George III. Treaty of Paris, 1783. And we're going to skip this. And yes, the Treaty of Paris, here's another thing about it. 1783, as you can see, what was British. So British was present-day Canada. The United States is the light blue. French is the purple. British got the islands in those 2 little spots. Spain. Everything yellow is Spanish. And then that gray was claimed by Russia, Spain, and Britain. The white is all unexplored, and the green is Russian. Okay. What did the U.S. gain? 1, independence. 2, land from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River and from Canada to Florida. Ohio River Valley. All redcoats were forced to leave the U.S. What did the British gain? Merchants could collect debts owed by Americans. Patriots had to give back items taken from loyalists. The Patriots won. Now what? The Americans are free from tyranny of King George III. So who gets to rule America? Yeah, so you don't have to worry about the bottom part, obviously. And I will leave you with that question, ladies and gentlemen. And remember, if you do like these videos, show your love by subscribing. Thank you guys. You guys are the best. Remember that I love you all.